I'm Catherine Novelli. I'm the former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. And I am here with Peter Harrell, who is the Senior Director for International Economics and Competitiveness at the National Security Council. And we are going to be talking about supporting domestic financing of US manufacturing of goods and services. So welcome, Peter. It's a delight to have you in this position and to have you here for this conversation. And I thought we could start, before we get to the financing part, we could just start with all of the activities the administration is doing right now in the Biden administration to help with getting our supply chain domestically in order, and what is happening there and what you're doing.
Yeah, well, Kathy, thank you so much for hosting this today. And let me thank EXIM for inviting me to speak with all of you today and for putting on this conference. And let me thank all of you who are attending today for your time. I mean, the EXIM Bank is such a tremendous priority for President Biden and for this whole administration. I mean, we see it as having so much potential to help promote US exports and to do so in a way that also advances our strategic priorities. You know, it's about promoting US exports, that is the core of EXIM, but also about really helping deepen America's relationships around the world. So really appreciate the chance to be here today, and thanks to everyone for joining. On your opening comment, Kathy, I really appreciate that you ask that, because I think that the supply chain and the broader kind of national competitiveness agenda are absolutely central to what the Biden-Harris administration is doing. You know, we are coming out of a public health crisis and coming out of an economic crisis. And I think you've seen this administration over the last 8 months really take a range of steps to help address the COVID crisis, both here at home and internationally, and to ensure that, you know, as the president has said many times, we not only build back economically to where we were, but that we build back better and looking to the future. And so we have a whole range of initiatives that we have been promoting and are continuing to promote to make America, you know, the world's leading place to do business, the world's leading place to manufacture things, the world's leading place to do your R&D. And I really think the EXIM Bank can be a key part of that for companies that are manufacturing things here in the US. You know, happy to provide some more detail, but on the supply chain agenda, per se, you know, the president kicked off back in February a national review of US critical supply chains, looking in the first instance at a couple of key products like semiconductors and drugs and pharmaceuticals and electric vehicle batteries. And, you know, also looking over the course of a year at a number of industrial-based sectors, such as the transportation industrial base, the public health industrial base, as real areas where we think we can foster domestic investments that will increase the resiliency of our supply chains, you know, making us less dependent on unstable sources for things like PPE and other critical goods, you know, that we saw affecting us during the pandemic, but really seeing the supply chain agenda as part of a broader competitiveness agenda that we have around making America the place to manufacture people to work.
Well, and just in terms of that competitiveness, one of the things I noticed when I was undersecretary is this huge competition with other countries who subsidize their exports. And can you talk about how the Biden administration looks at that and how they are working with partners like EXIM to deal with that situation?
Yeah, I mean, so if I think about our competitiveness agenda, I think we have a couple of pillars of work here. First pillar is really about fostering investments here at home. So we are through the bipartisan infrastructure framework and the president's proposed reconciliation package going to make transformative investments in the infrastructure here in the US, whether it's roads or ports or airports. And if you are manufacturing something, and particularly if you're manufacturing something for export, I think we all know how important it is to have a good and effective transportation infrastructure network to do that. Another part of our infrastructure investment package is really on the human capital front, right? If you're going to manufacture something here in the US, whether for consumption here in the US or for export, you need talented workers. You need workers who are able to have childcare if they're parents. And so you really see the human capital dimension of the investments that we are going to be making as something that we think is directly tied to being able to manufacture here in the US, because you need that human capital, that human talent to do it. And then the third thing that we are focusing on from a competitiveness perspective is really, the R&D side of this. We want to make sure that we are leading in the development of products, and that we don't just have a policy of a kind of invent it here, manufacture it there, but we have a policy of invent it here and manufacture it here. And so we're looking at a suite of incentives, both to help with the R&D costs, but then also to help with the manufacturing costs, in order to ensure that that isn't, if you've invented a new product here, that here is an attractive place to manufacture it. And then, of course, we want to see market access. We want American companies exporting all over the world. And so a piece of that is things like what Ex-Im does to make sure that if you are going to be exporting around the world, want to export around the world, you can get the export finance and the geopolitical risk insurance you need in order to make it financially feasible and profitable for you to export. And so I think that the kind of tools, Ex-Im brings to bear, that kind of last leg of the chair on, after we have made it very attractive to manufacture here, here's how you get the financing for that product to make sure it is exported over the finish line.
Great. And do you see exporting as part of the overall plan? Are we looking at how we're going to get more market access? And besides the finance, what are our other ways of getting market access, so that even if you are making things here and you have the finance for it, you still got to get across those barriers that other countries might be putting up?
Yeah, I think we are keenly focused on increasing market access for American-made products around the world. I think you have seen the president and the U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai in the sort of first 8 months of discussions with whether it's Europe or some of our partners and allies in Asia, really pressing for practical policy changes that enable market access. Now, that doesn't always have to take the form of trade agreements. I mean, I think we often get sort of into this discussion around trade agreements and are we going to table trade agreements? The administration is thinking through, its overall sort of trade agreement posture. But even as that goes forward, we are looking at and have taken advantage of sort of tangible ways to push countries to open markets to U.S. products. So, for example, in June, the president launched a new Trade and Technology Council with the European Union when he was there in June. And we are having our cabinet secretaries kick off shortly the first meeting at the cabinet level of Trade and Technology Council. And that is really a vehicle that we see as a way to, align technical standards for goods to make sure it's easier to export because standards are aligned. We see that as a vehicle to help, push the Europeans to make sure that they aren't erecting trade barriers to us, and also as a vehicle to get aligned with our allies to deal with unfair trade practices by China and other countries. So, that's sort of an area where we have found a tangible vehicle for cooperation on market access, both in Europe, but also cooperating with Europe on third markets, kind of even as we continue to develop our posture towards, some of the bigger trade policy agenda.
And Peter, who do you see as our biggest competitor to exporting? China comes to mind as a big one. And how are we, you've talked about all these different pieces that we're doing domestically to stay competitive, plus meshing with our allies. What else on top of that are we doing to deal with that competition? And do you see competition always as unfair, or is it something that we also have to look at ourselves and say, okay, we need to compete?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the question, Kathy. I mean, I think, we are, as the president has said, in an era of competition with China, including in the economic domain, and I think a lot of that competition in the economic domain doesn't just play out in the bilateral US-China trading relationship. It plays out increasingly in third markets, right? Where US firms are competing with Chinese firms to build, cloud services data centers, where US firms are competing with Chinese firms to build telecom network infrastructure, where US firms are competing with Chinese firms for, automotive and aviation kind of deals. And we are keenly aware that we need to up our game to make sure that US firms are able to compete in those third markets. And here I really want to highlight, I could talk some about what we do with our embassy platforms to help engage with foreign governments to try to, level the playing field in third markets and that kind of thing. But I also really want to highlight EXIM's transformational export program. This is a program that was included in the 2019 reauthorization of EXIM that provides EXIM with some greater flexibility on financing tools in a number of select sort of technological and industrial sectors where we really see ourselves in sharp competition with China in those third country markets. Things like telecoms, things like artificial intelligence. And so I'd really encourage companies that are attending this conference today, if you're not already aware of the transformational exports program, if you're in sort of sharp competition with a Chinese competitor in a third market, reach out to EXIM to understand what the opportunities are that this program might have to help level that playing field.
And what role do you see, Peter, Buy America? There's been a lot of talk about that. What role does that play in this whole constellation of things?
Yeah, I think that's another great question, Kathy. And I'd say the president, going back to his campaign and his days as vice president and in the Senate, has been a big supporter of Buy America and Buy American. Now, the first thing I should say when we talk about Buy America is that I think there's often misunderstanding out there about what Buy American means, right? Buy American applies to US government procurement of a wide range of goods and basically creates a preference for buying American-made goods. What it focuses on is whether the good itself was made in the US, not whether it is a US or foreign firm making the good. And I think there's often this confusion: if a foreign company is opened a manufacturing facility in the US and is manufacturing here in the US, that good is generally going to qualify for Buy American because it's made here in the US. I mean, take, for example, foreign-made cars, right? We have lots of car makers that have made open shop here in the US, and, Buy American has to do with where the product is made. And I think the president does see Buy American federal procurement as a tool to help, strengthen US industrial manufacturing. I think we're also cognizant it can only be one of a number of tools. I mean, federal procurement is important, particularly for certain goods, but most of the economy is private. I mean, we live in a free market, largely private sector economy. So this is what I would characterize as a tool that we see as valuable for particularly valuable for manufacturing of select products, particularly strategic products where we think there's a strong interest in having some of that manufacturing base here in the U.S.
And just on that, Peter, obviously supply chains are global. And at least in my personal opinion, I don't know that we're going to completely erase that, even if we do more here. How do you all look at that? How does the administration look at using some foreign inputs into ultimately what gets manufactured here?
So I very much agree with you. We live in a globalized world. We live in a world where supply chains are global. And I think, from an administration perspective, we think, global supply chains are and can be, incredibly valuable. I think we see a lot of opportunity. Spend a lot of my time right now working on sort of collective supply chain resilience with a number of our allies and partners. So, I think we see a lot of opportunity to work with our European allies, with our Asian allies, with our North American and South American allies to have kind of collective resilient supply chains. And so I think that, this debate often gets presented as kind of, is the US sort of inward looking and want to manufacture everything here in the US? And the answer is, no, we understand, we welcome working with allies and partners on trade issues, on supply chain issues, and really see a lot of opportunity to work together. Now, just as, our European allies want to make sure they have manufacturing and industry in Europe, we want to make sure we have manufacturing and industry here, just as our South Korean and Japanese friends want to have manufacturing and industry in Japan and South Korea. So, we do want to see a strong manufacturing sector here in the US, but we realize that is going to be a strong manufacturing sector that is going to be relying on inputs from a wide range of our allies and partners.
And how do you see, just referencing Korea, Japan, they've really had a very concerted industrial policy over a long period of time with the government intervening. Is there going to be a new industrial policy leaning here in the US, or do you think we're going to use still the kind of tools that we've been using all along?
So I think that's yet another really good question, Kathy. I mean, the National Economic Council Director, Brian Deese, and I should say I actually report up to him as well as the National Security Advisor. I am dual-hatted between the National Economic Council and the National Security Council. And so I think a lot about what he says as one of my two bosses. And he gave a speech maybe in June or July, late June, early July, where he laid out in a fair amount of detail the administration's thinking on industrial policy issues. And I'm not going to rehash that speech here, but I'd sort of make 2 points coming out of his remarks on industrial policy. And for all of you in the audience, if you Google it, you will find it. I think if you're interested in this issue, it really gives kind of a detailed explanation of our thinking. First thing I'd say is, industrial policy in the US is not a new idea. If you go back to the post World War II era, 1950s, you see a lot of US government-backed investment in research and development to help innovate products here. You see a lot of US-backed investment in workforce, in labor training to make sure that we have a strong workforce here in the US. You see a lot of US government-backed investment in physical infrastructure, right? Eisenhower built the national highway system. And so, I think what you see if you look at American history, whether then or going back even earlier to some, Hamilton's kind of views on industrial policy, you have this long tradition in America of thinking about what are the areas where the U.S. government can make investments in basic infrastructure and human capital and in R&D that then the private sector can take and run with, right? We're not a sort of state capitalist model country the way China is, and we never will be. But I think we as an administration have been giving a lot of thought and doing a lot of work on how can we, build that base of physical and human capital that really makes it attractive to invest and manufacture and do your R&D here in the U.S.
Well, I think you have your work cut out for you, but I'm glad it's you who's doing it. That's for sure. Is there anything else that I've left out that you want to say to the audience?
Yeah, I think I'd make a couple of additional points. One specific to EXIM. We have, as an administration, recommended that EXIM explore opening a domestic finance window that would enable folks who want to get capital to build a new facility here in the U.S. to help promote exports to get that capital. I know the EXIM staff and EXIM board are working through the modalities of that. But I want to say I'm hopeful that when we reconvene next year for this conference next year, that might be something that we'd all be able to talk about. The other point I want to make a little bit more generally, not just in the EXIM context, but I know for the companies that are attending today, as you think about manufacturing and export, you're not just thinking about EXIM. EXIM's an important tool, but you're thinking about all these other tools and policies that are out there that affect your corporate decision making. And I want to say, I think we here at the White House want to have an open line of communication. It's very important to us to hear concerns from the private sector, to hear what you're grappling with, where you think we're getting things wrong, where you think we're getting things right and should invest a little bit more. And so I just want to make a sort of standing offer. Feel free to reach out, because we really do want to hear from the stakeholders across the private sector, as well as our labor stakeholders and other key stakeholders, to understand how we can be a better foundation, a better partner for the kind of work you all want to do, inventing and making things here in the United States.
Awesome, Peter. And I have one last question for you, which is just a very practical one. I know that shipping costs are a big issue right now. And even as a consumer, I know that shipping is clogged. And so what is the administration doing about that, since we're in a room full of exporters?
Yeah, I think the current issues we're seeing with shipping, something occupy a lot of our time these days. And I would sort of divide our response into two big buckets. First bucket is how can we take some steps in the near term to help provide some relief at some of the ports like Long Beach and elsewhere, where we've really seen just tremendous backlogs. And you may have seen just a couple of weeks ago, the president appointed a new sort of ports and shipping coordinator at the Department of Transportation, who is really tasked with kind of knocking heads and convening stakeholders to figure out how can we get some extra, surge some resources in at a couple of the ports where there are real choke points to kind of clear the immediate backlog. And he is on a 6-month contract, and that is deliberate because his job is to kind of knock the heads and get the immediate backlogs cleared up. Obviously, over the longer term, ensuring that we don't get into this again, that is a longer term investment agenda around expanding port and airport capacity. And that is very much included in the bipartisan infrastructure framework and in the reconciliation package, but that's a long-term solution. And so that's why we have sort of trying to, surge some resources to clear up some of the current, bottlenecks over the next couple of months, while we look at the longer term investments that hopefully will ensure we don't get into these bottlenecks again. I will also say on the short term, in addition to Mr. Picari sort of working at this in the short term, we are obviously also looking at ways in which we can help deal with the truck driver shortage and things like that. We sort of all hands on deck on how can we deal with some of these near-term pain points.
Well, I just want to thank you for your time, Peter. I know you are super busy keeping everything afloat, and I think the country is lucky to have somebody like you serving, and the vision that the administration have and that you bring to the administration in looking at how we can make sure that we stay competitive is critical. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to be able to speak with all of you today. And thank you, Kathy, for hosting this, and really want to thank the EXIM team for organizing the conference and for inviting me to be able to speak.